Hi everybody! In this video we're going to be talking about the beginnings of our weave drawing project. At this point we have our two pictures in front of us that we've chosen to use for this project. Both of our pictures have been printed in black and white and they're the exact same size. These are both a 6x8 and both of our pictures are either horizontal or both vertical. So mine are both horizontal pictures. We're ready to start with this because we've practiced sketching them out in our sketchbook and we are confident at this point that we can actually draw them. So the first step that we're going to be doing today in order to start weaving these two reference pictures together for our final project is we're going to cut these out. So they all have a white border around them. You may have a vertical picture, but all of them do have a white border. So the first step is going to be using your scissors to cut along the edge of your picture and cut off the white border from both of your images. And I've already done that to save some time. It might be helpful for you to pause this video right now so that you have the chance to cut both of these out before I move on to the next step. The next step is going to be cutting strips on just one of our pictures. It's important that you only do one of these at a time because the second picture is going to have a different set of instructions. So don't assume that you can cut your second picture the exact same way as your first picture. Make sure that you wait for those instructions later on in the video. I'm going to choose one of my images and I'm going to cut this into strips. I would suggest that you turn your picture so that it makes sense to you. So if you have a vertical picture, turn it this way. Mine is horizontal, so I'm going to make sure that the picture that I'm looking at in front of me makes sense. It's not upside down, it's not backwards. It makes sense to me based on the orientation that it should be in. So mine needs to be a horizontal orientation because it's a horizontal picture. I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to make some marks across the top to help me cut this into correct strips. And the rulers that we have in class, they all start at 0 here, so this end point of the ruler is 0. Some other rulers though, the first line is 0, so you do need to check in with your individual ruler to see where the 0 is at so that you're sure you're getting the correct measurement. With these particular rulers, you can line up the ruler with the edge of your picture because the edge of the ruler is indeed 0. And if you have this oriented correctly, you'll see this is either 8 inches across if you have a horizontal picture. If your picture is turned like this, yours should be 6 inches across the top. I'm going to be marking every 1 inch on my picture. I'm using a Sharpie here simply so that you can see these lines. I would recommend that you use a pencil first though. You don't need to use a Sharpie at all unless you're having trouble seeing your lines. If you have a really dark picture, like mine is kind of on the darker side for my second image, I could even use a white colored pencil or a white charcoal pencil in order to make my lines on here show up a little bit more clearly. But for this picture, I'm going to just use a Sharpie. I'm marking every 1 inch across the top. On these rulers in class, the inch mark is the long line that comes after the number, not the line that's above the number, the short little line. We're marking the line that's after the number. And I'm just going to put a little dash above each of those markings on my ruler. And then I'm going to slide down and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the bottom of my picture because I need to make sure that these are going to line up. If I only mark the top, I can't necessarily ensure that my lines aren't going to be crooked when I cut them later. So I have, if I've done this correctly, I should have 8 strips or 8 little sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I was doing this vertically, I would have 6 sections across the top. If you have a lot of extra space on the end, or maybe yours is super short over here, check in with me to make sure that you measured this correctly. You should have 8 that are pretty close to the same size. This last one over here might be slightly smaller, depending on how this picture was printed out, but they should be pretty close in size. And if they're not, please let me know so we can check in and see if you measured incorrectly. I'm going to next use my ruler. And I'm going to, along each of these marks that I made for myself, I'm gonna draw a line. I want my line to extend all the way from the top to the bottom of my picture. And I'm gonna do that for each of these. And again, if I've done this correctly, I will end up with either 8 strips or I will end up with 6, depending on how I have my picture turned, whether it's horizontally or vertically. And there's not a right or wrong answer at this point. So I have my lines that go completely from top to bottom, and they go the whole way across. I either have 8 strips or I have 6 strips. The next step is going to be cutting all of these apart. So I want to do this carefully so I can stay on the line as best as I can. And my goal when I cut these is to still try to keep them in order on the table underneath me so that I don't have to worry about messing around with them later and trying to make sure that they're in the right order, or making sure that I don't have one flipped upside down by accident. So I like to try to just keep them all in order as I cut them. From here, you're either going to need a blank sheet of paper, or you could use your sketchbook paper if you would prefer. Just know that if you're gonna tape this into your sketchbook, you're gonna need to make sure that your sketchbook is with you every day in class while we're working on this project so that you still have your reference image with you. I'm gonna use a blank sheet of paper. This is just printer paper, an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Now I need to make sure that my paper is turned the same direction as my picture. So both of my pictures are horizontal, so I need to make sure that my paper is also horizontal so that it fits. I don't want to turn my paper vertically and have a horizontal picture because then this is not going to work out. So I have my paper turned the correct direction, and I'm going to now transfer all of my strips onto my sheet of paper. And again, I want them to be in order. I don't want any of them to be flipped upside down or not in the right spot. And I want to, as closely as I can, match these back up. And I'm looking at the top edge too to see, is it straight across the top? Is it jagged? If I've got a jagged edge, then I know that something's not right with how I've been lining my strips up. We want to be able to make perfect sense of this picture again, not have anything misplaced or not lining up with the strip that's next to it. So do your best to kind of puzzle piece this back together, and then we're going to be taping. Now the key to taping is you do not want to just tape one long piece of paper or one long piece of tape across the top. That's not going to allow us to weave correctly. So instead, I'm going to be cutting with either scissors, or I can use my tape dispenser to cut little strips for me. But I want to cut little pieces, one piece for each strip. So I'm going to hold my strip down that I'm about to tape, and I'm going to use a little piece of tape to just tape right along the top. If I've done this correctly, I should still be able to lift this up the whole way and flatten it down opposite the way that it's laid if necessary. And I'm going to keep doing that for all of these strips. Just one little piece of tape for each strip. And before I tape it down, I like to make sure it's aligned again, make sure I don't have any space between the strips, and then hold it down with my hand before I tape it down. Now, in order to save some time, I also have one that's already pre-taped. So I'm going to slide this off to the side, and I'm going to bring out the pre-taped one. And this is able to be lifted at every position of paper. So you can check to see, am I able to fully lift the strip up off of my paper without it falling off the paper and without, part of it being stuck down. The next part that we're going to do is cutting out our second reference picture. So we want to, again, turn our picture so that it matches our other picture. So I need this to be horizontal. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to cut the same strips in the same direction as I did before with this picture. So if I was about to do it the same way, I would again do 8 strips along the long end and cut them vertically. I want these strips to be going the other direction so that we can weave them into these strips. So I'm going to use this picture and I'm going to turn it so that it doesn't make sense. So now it's a vertical picture instead of horizontal. And I'm going to cut my strips this way for my second picture. Make sure that you're doing this correctly. So if you have a vertical picture like this, on your second picture, we're going to cut horizontally across. So I have my picture turned vertically instead of horizontally. And again, I'm going to mark every 1 inch. Now, if you had 8 inches last time, this time you will have 6 inches or 6 strips. If last time you had 6 strips, this time you should have 8. So if you have the same amount of strips as last time, you know that you were doing something wrong. So we're going to make our lines again. And again, if your picture is too dark for you to see regular pencil lines, you could use a Sharpie. You could use a white colored pencil instead. Anything that's going to allow you to see your lines very clearly on top of your picture. And I'm going to then cut these just like I cut out my first picture. And again, I want to try to keep these laying together in a way that they still kind of make sense so that I don't have to worry about puzzle piecing these together later on in a confusing way where I've got strips that are backwards or upside down and I'm trying to figure out which direction they need to be in order to make sense for the whole picture. Now this is where we're going to leave off for this particular video. I have my reference pictures, both of them are cut up. One of them is cut into vertical strips. The other one is cut into horizontal strips. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to weave them correctly, what we're going to look for in terms of weaving, and making sure that we can see and identify both of our reference pictures still, as much as we would like them to be identifiable or recognizable. So that will be in the next video, so tune in for that later on.